So this is the hall from. So there's that and that. That's in the same. And
What are you doing? Making sauce or something?
she's gonna. This is the hall Blanchard or whatever it is. Pull the scale. This is there's that sauce and that. That's in the same. We got bell peppers, regular peppers. Well, I think I sent you the thing on the peppers.
How is all the
Yeah, that was a haul, just the peppers.
That's like every.
She goes out and gets about that much every 2 days, twice a week. Right now, because it's just they wait and then they hit, and the balloons happen over time, so you'll get 3, 4, 5 weeks.
There he is. There he is.
I'm glad you.
It was just the opposite previous year. We
Yeah, it's
landed
here.
late, early.
Fire chief's not here.
It worked out perfect. I'm gonna do the same thing next year. Just get them early, get them moisture, and get the UV lights, and then when I know it's not gonna freeze. I did seed on a few things. So the carrots, okra, 2 or 3 things.
Here we go. That's got a lot of. We just started. Tomatoes are starting. We just started too late. That's crazy. Fruit, a lot of fruit.
Well, yeah, she's got some. She's got a bunch of- I've been working. One spot.
We had some just regular. Got grass in my eyes. Contacts are bugging me. Put the glasses on.
Gotcha.
Once it's done.
Like
Doing this the whole meeting.
Yeah.
Good afternoon and welcome to the regular Belton City Council meeting for Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. Good to have all the regulars, Marty, and all the other guests that we have here tonight. So at this point in time, the Pledge of Allegiance to the U.S. flag will be led by Councilmember Daniel Butcher. The Texas pledge will be led by City Manager Sam Liskey, and Councilmember Dan Kirkley will give the invocation.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Pray with me, would you? Father, we come before you this evening on behalf of those to whom you've called us to serve. And Lord, it is our desire that we do it in a fashion that honors you, that as we come before you, Father, we would recognize those principles that you have laid before us that bring us to a position of unconditional love, that we, Father, would serve as you have taught us to serve in your word. And we ask, Father, that we would do it with joyful hearts and pleasant minds. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dan. Call this meeting to order. First item on the agenda is public comments. I know a couple of folks have comments on item 8, but are there any other public comments? Okay, thank you. Items 3 through 6 are on the consent agenda, considered to be routine by the council and may be enacted in one motion. If any member desires to pull an item, we may do so. Item number 3, to consider the minutes of the June 8th, 2021 meeting. Item 4, to consider a resolution of support for the 2021 Federal Defense Community Infrastructure Program DCIP grant proposed by the Heart of Texas Defense Alliance for the Fort Hood SH-9 project. Item 5, to consider a resolution authorizing the submittal of a grant application to the United States Department of Transportation for a Rebuilding America Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity RAISE grant for the South Connell Street Capacity Improvement Project. And item 6, to consider authorizing the city manager to execute change order number 1 for the 2021 street overlay project to add additional streets and scope of work to the project. Does anyone wish to pull any of those items? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I move we approve items 3 through 6 as presented.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Item number 7 is to hold a public hearing and consider a zoning change from single family 1 SF1 to planned development single family 1 to allow for new homes to be built with a flat or shallow pitch roof on approximately 6.011 acres located on East 25th Avenue, described as the Guest Dulaney subdivision, block 1, lots 1 through 11. I have a staff report from Tina Moore before we go into the public hearing.
Hello.
Vu. We've heard this item previously, and the applicant has asked for a reconsideration. The Guest Dulaney subdivision is located east of Main Street off of East 25th. Here is a zoning map of that area. This area is zoned single family 1 with, apologize, can you hear me now? Okay. This area is zoned single family 1 with Heritage Park at the rear of the property, and that is zoned agricultural. As you can see, the rest of the neighborhood in that area is also zoned single family 1. The applicant is requesting a variance, not from the zoning standards, but actually from our design standards, which requires a minimum roof pitch of 6 to 12. The applicant is asking for an alternative roof pitch to construct new residential houses in this area. Again, this proposal will not change the current zoning for this property. It will still be zoned single family 1. The lot size and the area dimensions and setback requirements will still be in place. Here is what our current design standard requires for a roof pitch. Again, that is a slope of a 6 to 12 roof pitch. Here is a proposal that the applicant is hoping to submit. This is a modern home, and the proposed roof pitch that he's looking for is a 1 to 12, which is a 4% roof. And the way that he plans on constructing this, of course, there will be the roof, and actually there will be a material on top of that, a rubberized material that goes on top of that roof pitch to help keep the weatherizing intact. For the future land use map, again, the zoning will not be changed. This area consists of residential uses, and the proposed zoning seemed to work for this. It would not alter that. The zoning seems like a reasonable request in this area. Notices were sent out to property owners within 200 feet of the property. We did receive one letter back with this go around from an applicant that was concerned about traffic flow, property values, and water and sewer capacity. I don't believe they realized that the zoning was already in place for the development. Staff is recommending approval of this request from a single family 1 to PD single family 1. Again, the use of the property shall conform to single family 1 zoning district. The development of the property shall conform to all type 4 design standard except for the minimum exterior construction design for a roof pitch of 6 to 12. and the design required roof pitch shall meet the adopted standards of the International Residential Codes. That concludes staff's presentation. Along with me this time is the building official and also the applicant to help with any questions that you guys will have.
Okay, thank you, Tina. At this time, I'll open the public hearing. Does anyone have any comments concerning this matter? If not, we'll close the public hearing and open it for council discussion.
Well, I'll echo my original opinion is I fear that this type of roofing is going to incur more maintenance than standard roofs. And I drove around, and of course, mid-century, there's a lot of kind of, the Frank Lloyd Wright, is that right, guys? Yeah, a lot of those kind of flat type roofs. And there are several in Belton, and most of them are piled with look like a brush truck should probably come by and pick up the stuff off the roof, because there's a lot of stuff. So, but it's ultimately it's not up to us to maintain their roofs. That's up to them. I do have concerns about it, but it's it is what it is.
I would say that as a result of our last meeting, and I had an opportunity to discuss that a little bit later at our workshop, that I drove around and identified 3 single family residences that did in fact have well under 612 pitch, and one had several areas of flat. And recognizing that that is not maybe standard what we would do. One of the things that we as a council have been working hard to do, I think the last couple of years, is help developers develop for our community and for our neighbors and our citizens to be able to have developments that work for them and that are timely in our deliberations and that sort of thing. The other thing that I observed was, and I think Dave and I talked about that a little bit, was that a whole bunch, if not in my opinion, the majority of our commercial structures are flat roofed or very low pitched roofs. And some of them have issues. I think that's to be recognized. Some of our other roofs pitched, like the one that I just graduated from for 44 years, was pretty difficult to keep clean as well, because the steep pitch on the metal roof caused a lot of buildup in the gutters and that sort of thing that were pretty difficult to maintain. My concern is, and again, I think to what David said, is that's an issue that the home dwellers ultimately have to take care of. And that's not our responsibility to dictate what that is. But I think the technology is sound. I think there is potential for issues. There are potential for issues with all of our roofs. But to allow for the choice of that kind of structure, I think is important for us, as long as they are safe. And it's not my favorite roof, but I think it could very well be somebody's. So I think it's something that we need to consider favorably.
Thank you. Any other council members have comment?
I think Dan touched on it a little bit. I mean, really the design and the look is a matter of preference and individual's taste in what they want. I've seen a lot of commercial construction and various types of construction, and it just depends on the material and how it's built as to how it's going to last. I've seen a lot of houses built with flat roofs, or even a lot of the New Mexico style, the Santa Fe stucco. I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but they'll have a parapet, but then behind it is basically a flat roof or a very slight pitch, and it's all about the material you put on it. So I think the big question last time was the standards as far as the standards that exist, the building standards. So, if it meets that and, the customer, the end user is willing to buy the house, I don't think it's that big a deal for us.
It doesn't really meet design standards, correct? I mean, this is asking for an exception to the design standards.
Correct. It is asking for an exception to the design standards, but it does meet the International Residential Code standards, if that's what you mean.
That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
And if it meets the IRC, and we've got Bruce and my folks to make sure that it's built to standard, and I think we have no option but to approve it.
Well, no,
I
you
don't
do
know
have an
that.
option. You definitely have an option because we do have more restrictive covenants in a city which allows us to do it. Now, whether we have,
The poor choice of words.
Yeah.
I would recommend it. for
Yeah.
based on-
Yeah.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
Do I hear
Second.
second? We have a motion and a second to approve the zoning change. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
The motion passes 6-1. Build some good roofs that don't leak.
yeah, well, yeah.
Item 8 is to hold a public hearing and consider a zoning change from commercial highway to planned development, commercial highway and single family 2 district to allow for commercial uses in single family homes for properties located at the northwest corner of South Wall Street and East Avenue R, as described as the Cameron subdivision, Block 1, lots 1 through 8, Block 2, lots 1 through 4. Ms. Moore?
And thank you, Mr. Mayor. The location of the Cameron subdivision, it is east of I-35, west of Wall Street. Here's Savage Avenue, and here is the neighborhood. Here's a zoomed in view. As you can see, this is an established residential neighborhood with 11 lots that are already developed. The zoning for this property is commercial highway, as are the properties to the west and also to the south. The property to the north is zoned commercial 1 with the SUP for mini storage warehouse. And the property east are zoned single family 2. This is a city initiated zoning change. And the reason for that is one of the property owners over there approached the city. She was trying to sell her house and was unfortunately unable to because of a non-conforming status. The underwriter for a loan had realized that because it was non-conforming in case of a fire or natural disaster, if the property was destroyed more than 60%, they would not be able to rebuild. So they would not, unfortunately, allow her to sell the home. So the goal of this is to change the legal non-conforming status of the existing residential structure. The proposed zoning change would allow for both commercial and residential uses in the area. With that, the allowable uses in the commercial highway district, again, a lot of commercial, hotel, motel, multifamily, new car dealership, restaurants, truck stops are allowed in that zoning area. The area requirement is 7,200 square foot lots. The lot width is 60, the depth is 120 with the setbacks on the screen. The land use for single family 2 zoning district is to allow for single family detached houses. And a couple of different things that I was surprised to find out: telephone exchange, sewage treatment facilities, and also utilities. And again, we just recently amended our accessory dwelling units to allow that as permitted in section 36. The area requirement for the single family 2 zoning district is 7,500 square foot lots. The width is 60, the depth is 100. The setbacks for front yard is 25, rear yard is 20, the side is 5, and 15 when it's adjacent to a street. Here is the Cameron subdivision plat. This subdivision plat was reconfigured. The block 2 has been reconfigured. Instead of 4 lots, it's actually 3 lots. But the smallest lot footprint in this area is 60 by 124. So all of the lots in this area meets the minimum required standards. So with that, the smallest lot, the measurement for that is 7594 square foot. And again, lots in block 1, lots 1 through 4 were reconfigured to 3, and they measure at 82 feet wide by 124 foot deep. The future land use map identified this area as a mixed-use center for regional shopping, potential mall site, commercial uses. The area, type area 2 shows this as mostly, again, commercial highway frontages. Again, this would allow for both the commercial highway type use and also for the residential use that is currently in place. Property owners within 200 feet of the property were notified of the change. To date, staff received 2 letters of support from the neighborhood. Staff visited with the property owners in the area to just inform them what was happening, to let them know about the zoning change request. The Planning and Zoning Commission heard this item at their last meeting last week, and they recommended approval of the zoning change, and staff concurs with the recommendation. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Were there any major concerns addressed at P&Z?
No, sir. Actually, we held a work session last month to discuss the changes. One of the things that they had recommended was to possibly look at other non-conforming areas and try to come up with a solution to prevent something similar to this from happening in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Did I understood you to say that one of the lots is 60 by 124?
Correct.
That doesn't quite reach the 7,500.
It measured, it's a little over 60. It measured at, I'm sorry,
60 by 124 is 7440.
actually is a little over 60, it's like 60.7. I'm sorry, let me get that. Correct.
So
It's
are we sure that all the
60
lots are conforming, or do we need to take care of that at the same time?
is a little over 60, 60.70. And when I measured that, I came up with 7594.
If you measured it and it's good with GIS, then I'm happy. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, well, at this point in time, we will open the public hearing on item number 8. We have 2 folks who've signed up to address the council. And if you would, if you come up to the podium and tell us your name and your address. And Ms. Bales, you signed up first.
My name is Mary Peters Bales, and I live at 108 Savage Avenue in Belton. I've lived there since August of 1970, when we came back from the Navy and built our house. And my concern is we were never notified that the zoning was changed to commercial. And so when Tamara called me and asked me, had I signed any paperwork or anything okaying the change, I said, oh no, we didn't know that it was like that. And another thing, we had a water leak and I called it in, the city came to fix it. They accidentally hit the gas line. And the man told me, he said, it only affects this house and this house. And I said, well, this house is mine. And this was after I already knew if we had a natural disaster that I couldn't rebuild my house. And so that really bothered me. My husband passed away March 2 years ago. He was a veteran rated 100%. So I don't have to pay taxes on my house. And if something happened that I had to, go somewhere else and build, his name would not be on those papers anywhere. And that would take away that privilege for me. And so I just want to thank y'all for the time and thought that you put into it. Would appreciate your backing. Thank
Thank-
you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Appreciate your coming. Tamara Rodriguez. And again, if you would set your name and your address for us, please, ma'am.
Tamara Rodriguez. I actually live at 7268 West FM 436. The 1705 South Penelope is my mom and dad's house. They both have deceased. We didn't get to sail during COVID. We had to wait. And the young man that we are going to sail to had just gotten out of the Navy. We were informed by the underwriter that it was commercial highway, which was a total shock to us. My mom kept every little thing to that house. I had a folder to go through. I couldn't find anything about it, and I'd asked Mary, and she couldn't. That's when I met Miss Moore here. So the underwriter said, if that house was to burn down, that the young man couldn't build it back as is. And that was a problem that they couldn't take on. So they denied him. So that's when we decided if it could be changed, we would like to do that. And then speaking with some of the other ones, no one knew about this. So it is a problem. And I'm hoping that y'all will see that we do have this and change it for us. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. Appreciate your concerns. Mr. Listy, you have any comment on that?
Yeah, no, I just appreciate the property owner in the area coming out and making comments in favor of this. Tina and Bob reached out to the neighborhood when we had the individual request and we saw the corridor zoning. Go back to the zoning map in the area, Tina, if you would. This is not an unusual situation, but we certainly see the impacts that it has. What you see is a corridor of commercial highway zoning, essentially one block in width from the interstate over to Wall. And yet that zoning was, as we understand it, was put in place, many, many years ago, perhaps when the original zoning ordinance was established. And of course, the residents have been there, they've allowed to operate. The zoning is what you might term fairly permissive in this area, allowing the commercial uses, but also creating a non-conforming or grandfathered use for the residences that are there. So with the individual requests, the staff reached out to the neighborhood, sent a letter. I know Bob and Tina went door to door and talked to a number of people, and there was general support to make this change. And so our approach was to certainly allow the opportunity for continued residential use for those that are there, but not to take away any rights of the folks who had commercial as a current or potential use in their mind. So this seemed like a reasonable approach, and P&Z was very receptive to it when that item was presented to them as at a workshop. And so this is, I think, a real positive approach to try to address the situation, retaining the rights for the property owners, but also allowing residential use to continue as long as practical.
Thank you.
I have a question. So with this, it would be zoned kind of multi, they can commercial or single family. If a lot sells and is turned into a commercial purpose, one, how does that affect the rest of the residents in that area if there's some sort of commercial activity in the middle of those houses? Two, then essentially that would be allowed to go back to single family. Obviously, long-term planning and development would say this needs to be commercial at some point in the future. So how do we prevent, once it becomes commercial in a couple lots or something, from going back to single family? And then I agree with planning and zoning, P&Z. If we can find any other existing non-conforming uses to this issue, if people want to build flat roofs and they leak, I feel like I would lose no sleep over them choosing to do that. But if somebody's house burns down because we have this ordinance in place and they can't rebuild, I would lose sleep over that.
Sure. I think the goal here is maximum flexibility for the property owners to be able to do with their property what they would like to do. This may be too much commercial in terms of market. And so think that's what you're seeing here is a recognition of that. As times change and perhaps some additional retail or commercial uses come in, I think that will kind of dictate what the market situation is. And a commercial development would have to conform to setbacks and so forth, and firewalls and so forth to protect the residences and provide a transition to the existing residences if they come in. So it's again trying to recognize that we have zoning in place, but we don't want to take away any rights of the property owners that are there. And this seems like a good balance in trying to address that.
And I agree with Daniel. I think for those of us who are maybe a little more mature not in wisdom, but in years, you understand, it seems to me to be wise because a lot of us might very well have homes that we've had for numbers of years in a long, heavy traffic areas that are zoned commercial, that if we had something happen to it, that we wouldn't be able to repair it. So I think every place where people live, we need to be looking at that as well.
I'm sure this has already been explained to the people in that area, but I think the purpose of the zoning is to kind of steer development toward commercial in that area. And so, but I guess, so there's a little concern there that, we're trying to steer that corridor toward commercial, but we're gonna kind of, to Daniel's point, let the residential kind of ride and continue even after the current owners. But on the flip side of that, I think what you're saying, I think I agree, is that development of the commercial is pretty slow in this area, and there's probably not a foreseeable immediate drive toward that in this area. So, and if it does, I'm assuming, it's still desirable for commercial because it's zoned that way or the other way. And as somebody comes in and buys all those houses out for a good price and makes it worth their while, then it can be all commercial at that point. So I think this works, but I just wanted to kind of clarify in case it hadn't been clarified. I mean, that zoning is kind of to steer development where we want it and where it makes sense, and keep things kind of go in the right direction for future development.
And I think this fixes the problem for the current grandfathered landowners in this area, but still allows for the market pressures to lead that to become commercial in the future, if indeed it does. And so I think this is a very good solution.
I sure apologize for the surprise. Hope we're moving quickly to rectify this. Ms. Bales, thank goodness your house didn't burn down. So let's get this fixed and look for any other areas that we may have to rectify this in our city.
Yeah, and the last,
Thank you.
I wouldn't know where to draw the line between allowing, 8 sales down the line to still be, single family. But to me, the biggest issue is the natural disaster,
Well, in all honesty, we have a lot of neighborhoods. We would call this a neighborhood in transition, and Lake Road is probably the most active one. And so if you've got a single family home, it's zoned single family. And so if you want to keep it single family and for forever sandwiched between 2 commercial buildings, you have the freedom to do that once this is changed, as this would also allow them to do. But I think, again, it's a wise decision to make it a planned development. So you can go left or right. It's not, it's just as easy to go commercial. So it doesn't impede development, but it also does not restrict the freedom of the homeowner to use their property as it's intended. So yeah, I think it's a good compromise. And so with that, I would make a motion that we, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the city initiated zoning change. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, ladies. Well done.
Thank you for coming. And Mary, when you decide to sell your house in about 30 years, it's probably going to be worth a whole lot more with all that commercial development around you. So.
Well, and at least you got the red zoning instead of the yellow zoning. So you get the best of both
Right,
worlds.
you got it. Somehow we knew it was going to be red. Thank you. Thank you. It's good to see both of you. And also, Ms. Rodriguez, I hope that facilitates the transaction that you're trying to get accomplished as well.
Well, maybe it paused long enough, you can double your money now. That's the price of real estate going the way it is.
That's right. Yeah, it's ready to go.
Today.
Yes. You're legal, yes. Okay, item 9. Again, thank you all for coming and expressing your concerns. Item 9, receive a report and discuss the 2016 non-annexation development agreement. And Director of Planning Bob Van Til will tell us about this.
Mayor, council members, thank you very much. Want to have a conversation with you about these non-annexation development agreements that will, some of them will expire later this year. And they are slated to expire on November 22nd of this year. As some of y'all may recall, the city annexed about 540 acres back in 2016. Prior to that time, the city entered into about 50 development agreements, allowing folks to stay in the ETJ of the city and yet not, be annexed to that kind of thing. Several of them were for 10 years and several of them were for 5 years. And we're going to focus on the ones that are for 5 years because those are the ones that are coming up right away. And those will expire, like I said, in November 21. Just a little bit of background on what a non-annexation development agreement is. Back in the early 2000s, on the heels of a lot of pressure from the development community, cities were then required to, during what was then a fairly unilateral power to annex property, particularly in rural areas. They were required to enter into these non-annexation development agreements so that folks that were in the ETJ of the cities could, basically have a little bit of control over what their destination or their destiny was in terms of the land use. The caveat, however, was that you needed to be exempt in some way, which is agriculture or timberland or wildlife management. And those are specific things that are articulated in the law. In 2019, all that changed. The annexation authority shifted mostly from the municipality to the property owner. And so that whole environment has changed in terms of how we annex and how we approach annexations. However, with the 2019 annexation law, there were some grandfathering provisions in there that allows us to honor the agreements, if you want to use those words, that were enacted prior to 2019. And as I mentioned, the ones that we're talking about were entered into in 2016. So we can honor the words, the commitments that are in the current development agreements. Okay. So we have development agreements that are on both the north and the south, but I felt it was probably easier just to, kind of break up the city into two parts. So I'll start with the north end. They were about 2 tracts that were annexed. That expire in 2021. They're pink, and the blue ones will go in 2026. As you can see, there's one on the very far end of Sparta Road, and then there's one just north of Interstate 14, right along the extension of proposed 2271. A critical piece of property there. And the reason for showing all these is not just, hey, here's where they are. I mean, you all know that. You probably were there during the annexation, most of you were. But to see that there is some strategic value in the location of those properties. I'm going to move on to the south part of town. And continuing on in that same conversation, we see some very important things that have happened in the last 5 years or more. The first one that I've written on there is the improvements to Interstate 35. Significant investment. Other than that, local investment by both the city as well as the EDC. We've got water and sewer lines that are extended down in there. You see the blue and the green lines that are going to that brown area, which is River Farm. And that is an area that you'll remember there's a development agreement with that family, that property owner, in the event that the property is developed. Those are the controls that we have there. So you can see a significant amount of investment being made in the southern portion of the city along the corridor that was evaluated for annexation back in 2016. And again, the pink are the 2021s and the blues are the 2026s. So you can kind of see how that breaks up along those lines. We make the observation that the southern portion is a significant area for future development. And it's something that needs to stay on the front burner. We're seeing the infrastructure having been extended. And so, once we push the public improvements down in an area that triggers that development interest, we see that all the time. And the agreements that we have down there allow us to have an important, well, the word we use is balance of interest between the city and the property owner. So we have this ability to remain partners in the area, even though they have the development agreement. That is, subject to our consideration in the future. So if anything were to ever develop in that area or a property that's subject to that agreement, then, we automatically become involved in that property, even though it's still in the ETJ. We have the opportunity to become engaged in a conversation that helps us to understand whether or not, hey, maybe this is the time when we need to annex this property or not. And that option is still always available. So based on all those things that I mentioned to you, we are suggesting to you 3 possible scenarios. One is to just allow the agreements to expire, and the process becomes then to annex the property. We just basically say we're gonna, they expire in 2021. That's it. You all agreed that you would be annexed after that period of time. So, hey, guess what? We're gonna annex. Option number 1. Option number 2 is to let the agreements expire and let them go back into the county as part of the ETJ, right? And so, as a reminder to all of us, we have very little development control except for plat review, and y'all know that. The third option is to look at the agreements and extend them for another period of time. And an important aspect of that is that you remain together that way. In terms of there's an agreement between the property owner and the city, there's still the understanding that that it's okay for them to be exempt in those 3 categories, primarily agriculture in this case. But if that ever changes, if there's any kind of development pressure there, then it's more than just plat review. We look at something more substantial. And so based on those 3 options, and of course, this is a conversation you want to have feedback from, we're suggesting that we look more closely at option number 3. And if you agree with that, then we've got a schedule here that we'll wrap it up before November. But in essence, what we suggest will happen is that in July, if you agree, we bring a resolution to you that says, we empower our city manager to execute those agreements when the time comes. We'll contact the landowners and we'll go through the process of extending those agreements. Those are not negotiated agreements. These agreements are the agreements that you have 6 years ago or 5 years ago. And they will basically change the dates on those, 5 years from now. So if you agree to 5 years, that's what we're going to do. If you want some other time period, we'll do the other period. Where we think that it's in the best interest of the city, let me put it like that we don't let the properties just go back to the ETJ. You went through a significant effort to initiate the annexation process in 2016. That was a tough process. It's never easy. If you want to just, capstone that right now, and well, not right now, but at the end of November, you can annex that. You don't know exactly what it's going to do, to, how that's going to go. My guess is going to be pretty exciting. But if we talk about extending the agreements, which I think is still, keeps us in the driver's seat and keeps us in control of the property more than if those properties were in the ETJ, so to speak. We can continue on with the same activity. We watch the properties a little bit closer. So we're suggesting that we talk more closely about option 3. We're suggesting option 3. But again, we're talking about this and see where you want to go and how you want to proceed. So I'm going to stop there and thank you for your time and see if you have any questions.
Thank you, Bob. Just one comment. When you said if we go ahead and annex them, it might be pretty exciting. It's an interesting term, having lived through several annexations in the
Well,
past.
It is
I'm just
exciting.
guessing.
Just
I'm
what
just
type of excitement is it? I look at this just like the last item. It's like commercial zoning and residential. It's like this area where it gives the opportunity for it to return or stay in its current use. But if they decide to develop it, it's an easy path to annexation. And so I think it's just a good tool. It doesn't force the homeowner to do one side or the other, but it keeps the options open. So I think that's the wise decision personally.
So what about the one that you said, the property that you said is not exempt anymore?
They lost their ag status, right?
Right.
What's the status there? That automatically triggers annexation when that happens?
It does. We need to follow, I think there's a little handout in your packet that has that procedure in there. We give them notice, we go through the process. Obviously, we're going to reach out to them and make sure, because we're looking at the tax rolls and seeing that the exemption is gone. And make sure that, like some other properties early in the process of evaluating all these properties, we noticed that some of them didn't have their ag exemption. And all of a sudden they did. And so we have to make sure that that's still the case. But if it stays the same, then we'll initiate the annexation process and we'll bring them into the family.
I think you said my concern, because sometimes things may lose their exemption and they don't even know
Right.
that they've lost their exemption. And so by bringing that to their attention, they may be able to get that back, and then they would be eligible for what we're talking about.
Sure. And we've been contacted by one property owner whose tax bill did go up quite a bit, and that was the only explanation we could provide. And they went to the tax office and they got it brought back. So they were able to retain their ag exemption. So there's going to be some dialogue back and forth as we go through this process.
And it might be good, it might be good for those people to be reminded that you want to keep that exemption. This is a good opportunity for those conversations.
I think that's a good point, just to make sure we don't want to surprise anyone on any of those issues. Is 5 a magic number with the rapidity of development in some of those areas? Do we need to look at it in 2 years or 3 years, or is 5 soon enough?
There's no magic number there. We talked to a number of communities around the area, and they have numbers anywhere from 5 to 20 or more. I mean, you go up to 45.
Right.
So it's just reflective of what we have done in the past.
Well, and if it's going to be developed, that's going to take care of itself anyway.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Two quick questions. One is options 1, 2, and 3. Number 1 is, if we choose option 3, is that a bulk decision with every one of those 5-year properties to extend another 5 year, number one. And number two, is that a unilateral decision on our part? Those two questions.
The answer to the first question is yes, it would apply to all the agreements that will be.
One decision, all
Right,
properties.
exactly.
Okay.
It does unless y'all tell us different. And that's one of the reasons we're
Yeah.
having this conversation tonight. I mean, nobody's asking for an answer tonight, but y'all need to look at all of those parcels so that when Bob and Sam and whoever deals with these people, we can in good faith tell them it's the council's intention. You know, if you don't extend your agreement, there's a chance you might get annexed. We need to be able to, you know, tell them the truth. You know, there's no guarantees what's going to happen 6 months from now, but at least in good faith, we can tell them that's your intent. If you want to pull some of them out, you need to, you know, let the staff know that.
Which in fact is the answer to question number 2. Thank you.
And it's not unilateral. They have to agree to extend. If they don't, then, you know, then the agreement is what it is. And then y'all need to make a decision on what to do before or soon after the agreement expires.
I think the annexation agreement does keep a lot of options open. But maybe one that we haven't thought about is a landowner who wants to develop little ranchettes, septic and water, and do that in a rural setting and not be annexed. And that only way that could happen if we let those expire, correct?
No, if you extend the agreements and they come to you, you have the opportunity to evaluate annexation at any point, similar to what was done on River Farms. So the development agreements leave open the opportunity to evaluate that at whatever time development occurs. So if someone comes forward with a ranchette type subdivision, you know, we're extending utilities. If it's in proximity to the utilities, you might want to have something to say about whether those properties should be connected to the utilities. If they're beyond the likely extension of those and the impact is pretty minimal, then you would have the opportunity to evaluate that within the context of the development agreement.
In all reality,
we actually had one out on Toll Bridge Road that y'all approved where it was a family type deal, but they kind of split it up and built a house and y'all let it go, which is very similar to, I think, what you're talking about.
in all reality, I mean, there's due process. There's going to be a process. This does not ultimately force anyone to be annexed. It just starts the domino, and then we evaluate the decision. Do we go forward? And it may end up in annexation. But again, even with that, it would have an annexation hearing, just like probably everything else, or so.
An exciting annexation.
Exciting annexation.
One other thing, just this is much easier this time on the landowners. Before, we were in an annexation mode. Y'all are seriously looking at annexing a lot of areas. And in that case, the landowners had to make the decision, okay, if I really think the city's going to annex me, I'm going to sign the development agreement. If I don't, then I may not sign the development agreement. That's not really the case this time. We're just asking them to extend what they've already got. And they're not looking at immediate possibility of annexation.
It's not imminent.
Because they're maintaining their ag exemption and use.
Was the 5 and 10 year, was that decided on by the property owner, or I don't recall how that decision was reached?
We did.
The council, there was a lot of evaluation.
No, we looked at 5 year, 10 years. We looked at some of the neighbors and all of that stuff.
Sure.
And also what's the likelihood of the areas being developed. And so
Right, the Sparta Road area seemed a little bit farther out in terms of time frame. It was kind of at the end of our edge of our utility system. This area down south, we knew the water and sewer was coming. And so it seemed more timely, closer time frame for potential development.
Yeah, it was
so it's linked to that.
That's exactly right. It was the South Belt and utility extension was why we chose the 5 versus the 10, because it was imminent.
I've got a little bit of a more pessimistic question.
You?
So imagine that. So the only reason I could say that you would even want to entertain option 1 would be if there's any kind of good possibility that our friends in Austin are going to come back and say, oh, well, now we're not going to let the cities hold those agreements. Those agreements aren't going to stand.
Yep.
So, you know, they seem to dictate things that then force our hand to react. So what's the likelihood? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I mean, what's the
There's no
likelihood
precedent
that
currently.
they're going to do that?
Well, they
could-
can't, I
or
mean,
would
it's
do
a,
that?
these legal agreements predated their action. So then it has to be tested in a court, right? So it'll have to go through, which is, you know, there later. I mean, does that take all these legal agreements off? And that's something that we don't know. And so the best thing is just to leave it in force. And then it may be tested by us or by someone else in the future.
Again, these are agreements signed by the property owners,
Yeah.
recognizing the potential for annexation, but recognizing that they would like to stay outside as long as they're not developing. So it's a two-way agreement between us and the property owners at this point in time. And so the voluntary extension of that on the same terms is about as reasonable as we think we can be, short of legislative action.
I'm all for option 3. Don't,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not
right.
saying I'm not,
you-
I'm just saying,
You have a very good point, and that did not come up to my knowledge in this session of the legislature. Certainly 2 years from now, it could come up again. Again, if these are all approved, you'll be 2 years into a 5-year agreement. And like Mayor Pro Tem Lee says, that may have to be tested in court to get a final resolution of it.
And that's certainly been discussed over in the building. I mean, we've looked at it, but I mean, we just don't know. I will say this last session was not as negative towards cities maybe as the previous one. So that was good.
I heard
Thank you.
TML yesterday discussing that very point, that they were really concerned there was going to be another city bashing session, and it wasn't quite as bad this time around as it was the past time. But I thought of the same thing the guy did.
so it's not just me.
It's not just you for being pessimistic this time, because I did hear some of the things that the legislature did do, and certainly it gives me pause. But I think from what I'm hearing, everybody seems to be, I'm not trying to speak for everybody, but I'm hearing that number 3 is what most of us would like to consider.
I have a question, just pretending like I don't know anything, which probably don't know much about it yet. But so these areas down south where we are extending this water and sewer line, they don't get city access unless they are essentially annexed, correct? Some of these pink areas. So like, is there, I know that most of the answers would be no. I just wanted to ask, like, is there would we ever offer, like, just say, hey, you also can voluntarily annex, at this agreement? I mean, you might get one, but I don't know it. Anything that takes pressure off of us forcing somebody or extending is all for me. But I mean, if they're that close to a water and sewer line now, they might have other ideas if they have that access. So
That's true.
The scenario would be if they would come in with a subdivision plat or a proposed development that would connect to the utilities, that would be the time to evaluate annexation at that time. Because they're basically agreeing to retain ag use and their exemption or voluntarily annex. And so that would be a decision point for the council.
It always become part of the negotiations.
Do you all have the sense of direction that you need from the council?
I do. Yes, sir. Please so.
Come back on the 13th with a resolution for y'all that would trigger this process. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Mayor.
it.
Thank you, council.
Item number 10, conduct a work session on the fiscal year 2022 budget considerations, including but not limited to. Y'all come back.
I ran off another group.
They did. Sorry, Mike.
I did it again.
everybody saw budget and was like,
Yeah, really? Another budget presentation.
But not limited to the following funds: water and sewer fund, drainage fund, tax increment reinvestment fund, commonly called TERS, and the Belton Economic Development Corporation BEDC fund. And Mr. Rogers is.
Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. As we continue our path towards a budget adoption, we're going to talk about the final 4 funds, budgeted funds tonight: water and sewer, drainage, TERS, and EDC. So let's get started. Before we talk about 22, I kind of want to tell you where we expect to end 21. Let me do this. So In fiscal year 21 for water and sewer, we budgeted revenue just over $9 million with expenditures of 8.9 million. We may end up this year at $9.9 million of revenue. So you're saying to yourself, holy mackerel, Rogers, how did you miss it by almost $1 million? You wouldn't say that. That's correct. Thank you. Well, I can tell you, I can tell you how that is.
Put it in the
Roll the
fund
dice.
balance, right? Swing by that.
So what we were doing, this is not being recorded. Hopefully Chris missed it again like he did last time. Anyway,
No, it is not.
inside joke. Okay. Anyway, so you'll recall this time last year we were knee deep in COVID. They started closures March of 20, and we were doing the budget for 21 under the assumption that COVID was going to hit us in the revenue very hard, and so what I did was I budgeted for 21 very conservatively. So I took my estimate for where we were going to end 20, and I discounted that by 5%. I said, okay, there'll probably be maybe 5% delinquency, which I normally don't do. And then for 21, I used a 2% growth rate as opposed to like a 5%, which is what I know would have probably budgeted for 21. So essentially this budgeted number of $9 million is about $500,000 lower than it should have been because we were being conservative this time last year. So on the expenditure side, it looks like we may go over around $270,000. So instead of raising fund balance by 14,000, we may increase fund balance by about 650,000. So again, water surplus was related to that budget number. On the expenditure side, it looks like we're going over a bit. Most of that is due to these debt payments to the BCWCID. You'll recall that BCWCID issued $6 million worth of debt for Belton projects. And we were expected to pay $31,000 a month for that debt repayment. Well, we had a misunderstanding with them, and we thought we were only going to have to pay 3 months worth of debt of that $31,000 in fiscal year 21. And it turns out that they started billing us in October because they're building up those future debt payments. We just had a misunderstanding of how many months we were going to pay for. And then there's some purchase orders that carried over from last fiscal year that are being paid in the current fiscal year, and that's something we need to adjust with a future budget amendment. That's why we're going over on expenditures. So we may end this year with just over $7.3 million of unrestricted fund balance. For next year, fiscal year 22, we have a preliminary budget that shows revenues of $10,460,000, expenditures of $2,604,000. So we would draw down reserves by about $143,000. That would bring us down to $7,202,000 in fund balance. So you've seen this chart before. What do our reserves look like? And the green, again, or bar showed you the dollar amount of our reserves since 2015. And what you can see is all the way back to 2016, we've been kind of maintaining fund balance in the $6 to $7 million range here. The blue line that you see across there is our minimum reserve requirement in our current fund balance policy. Here in the utility funds, it's different than the general funds requirement. Here, instead of just 25% of budgeted reserves, it's 25% of budgeted reserves plus 1 year of debt service. And that just ensures that we have enough reserves to cover debt payments if something happened. So you can also see, not only have we maintained about $6 to $7 million of reserves, our minimum reserve requirement has been kind of hovered around this $4 million mark since all the way back 2017. Where we kind of project to be for 2022, we would have budgeted reserves, $7 million, about 7.2, and we would have a minimum reserve requirement of 4.2. So about $3 million over our minimum reserve requirement in 22. So as I said earlier, our last meeting about general fund, I'm going to come back to you in a future meeting where we talk about our capital improvements program, and then we're going to talk about this number, right? This surplus. So let's look at revenues on a budget to budget basis. Again, our current budget is $9,003,000, and we look like we might come in at $9,914,000. Our 22 budget is $10,460,000, huge increase of $1.4 million over the 21 budget, but that's really not the best comparison here. The better comparison is to look at the 22 revenue budget versus this 21 estimate. And so we're really increasing on the revenue side about 5.5% over the current year's estimate. And that's 546,000. For 22, I'm going to budget a 6% increase in revenue, and that's our 4-year average growth rate. We've been fairly consistent there. There's no rate increases planned for 22. And those other revenues that you see, our fees, miscellaneous revenues and all that, essentially flat, not much change there. 52% of our utility revenue comes from water services, while sewer only makes up about 37 of that. And on the utility rate side, I wanted to show you this little schedule here. So our last utility study was done in 2014, and that had recommended rates then for 2015 all the way out to 2019, what you see across here. We've been following that study each year consistently. In fact, we have not raised rates since 2019. So 2020 is the same as 2019, 2021 is the same as 2019, and 2022, we will propose rates that remain unchanged. For so that's would be 4 years in a row with no rate increases on the utility side. What we do plan to do in 22 is have another utility rate study done. That's budgeted in the utility fund. What that will do is set a new rate structure for the next 5 years. And as we do that, we're going to explore some different rate models. For instance, we will have the consultant look at winter averaging just to kind of see what that might look like if we implemented something like that. We'll probably look at block rates. So what would it look like if we build, in 5,000, if you use 10 to 15,000, it's this, those different scenarios of ways that we can charge our customers. And that's going to be done in 22.
Mike, can I just throw out one comment for some of the people who haven't heard this 1,000 times? I get complaints from time to time about how high their sewer bill is. And I think it would be helpful to point out that's pass-through money that we're helping to expand the regional sewer plant. And that's not something that we're getting rich off high sewer rates.
You are correct about that, sir.
Well, can I make a point there too? I mean, just like our tax rate, I mean, I know we've talked about these fund balance, and I mean, with the money that we're still adding to that, and with that high level of excess that we're carrying, I mean, is it really needed to do another rate study in 22? Spend the money for one on a rate study, but why not put that off a few years and hold where we are and let that settle for a while and give a little relief? I mean, I feel like financially we can afford to do that.
The rate study costs about $30,000. A rate study will do a couple of things for you. One, we want to make sure we treat customer classes equitably. And so, right now it's fairly consistent. We don't, but there may be, it's all in how we develop things, but you don't know that you're doing that until you have the study and things like that. Second, we could find out, especially if we're going to explore different rate models, there may be some benefits to doing it one way versus the way we're doing it now. But also you know, if you may do the study, we may do the study, and I'm just saying this. We don't know what it may find until the study's done. We may find we're overcharging customers. But I don't know that until I have the study done. It works down to, we would work into this rate study a budget for the next 5 years, including all of the additional debt service or additional projects and debt service and all of those extra things that we expect to have happen for, say, 22 to 27. And then we see where those rates would fall. What rate would it take to get us there following that budget? I can tell you we're, 4 years out, we're way past due a rate study. We really are. At some point in time, you're just.
And we certainly know about a number of significant capital projects that are on the horizon. Sewer plant phase 2 being one of the most significant ones. And of course, the study will look at operational costs, staffing, everything, a purchase of water, our debt with BCWC ID number 1, and then sewer plant expansion. So it's timely to do a study and to look at that. And certainly it will figure in our existing rates and the generation of funding that's providing, but it's important to look out more than just 1 year at a time and adjust. I mean, perhaps the rates could come down, but we need to fold in all the anticipated costs over the next 5 years to address that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said, because I was going to say that, because the rate study is not just a static, what if we stayed the same? It's more of a strategic plan for water and sewer that includes more water towers, expansions of sewer, those things that we're not currently budgeting for. Now, we do have a significant fund balance that could be going towards those capital projects.
Correct.
So it doesn't have to be total debt.
Correct.
It could be a significant amount of cash, but that we will also have to replenish because it'll be higher operating costs.
Yes, sir. You're correct.
I just think, my point is things are just getting more and more expensive for us, but also for our tax-paying citizens. And maybe I'm jumping on John's bandwagon here, but with these fund balances and with the increase in appraisal values, it's just like we're taking more and more and more from our taxpayers. And so anything we can do to use some of that fund balance down, maybe correct those amounts to where it's not quite the gap. I think it's our responsibility to do that.
Well,
I think it'll be a good $30,000 spent.
Yeah.
Especially in review some of our corporate rates or business rates.
Yep.
As well as some of the second tap, all those little things that we've talked about for the last 3 or 4 years.
Sure.
And then if we have the ability to use fund balance to supplement some of that expense.
Right.
The other thing that's not happening, that used to happen in the past, is we're not earning anything on money. There's
Correct.
no interest earnings on those excess fund
true.
balances. And so I think it'd be pretty smart to try to spend some of that in the future after the rate study's done and we
good.
look at opportunities, whether it's water tower or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Yeah, to that point, I've got several business properties that typically are less than $60 a month for all of it, right? Water, sewer, and the whatever the rain tax, the
Drainage.
Drainage.
So if a homeowner with 2 meters, I'm neck and neck with him.
Yeah, exactly. And that's and this is on 10,000 or more square feet with multiple acres,
Right.
paying $60 a month versus homeowners who are paying 120.
Yeah.
So I agree that there needs to be some equitable split,
Yeah.
and not put the burden on the homeowner, because we want to make it as reasonable to live in this community as possible.
I think-
Please review that 5% growth rate and let's look at building permits, new home construction, taps or new meters, all that. And if we need to up that percentage, we're in the middle of a housing boom. I don't know why we wouldn't see more than 5% growth.
Right. I'm using.
What year?
I'm using 6 just because it's a 4-year. The last couple of years were like, I think 11. And that's just total revenues. But I need to do that. Yeah. It was like 11%, 8%, and down less than 1%. So it does go. It's not a static. Are we okay going forward? I want to make sure that we're good on it. Okay.
Yeah. We probably don't agree, but yeah.
Right.
Let's
Okay,
move
so
forward. Let's
So
move
we
forward.
want to give you complete information, and that's what's really important, to fold in the TBRSS plan expansion. The district has come to us with costs for water and for treatment. Water treatment is another component that is something that we're going to be dealing with in the future. So there are going to be significant capital costs in the future. All that folded into the study will help us know what the rates ought to be going forward.
Just one more question. How long was it, we did that one rate study that we just basically implemented just a couple of years ago. We made it in 2019.
7 years.
How long before that was a rate study before that?
Before the 2014 one?
Yeah.
We typically do one for every 5-year period. It's 5 years kind of the planning horizon that we've done. And I believe one preceded that one in that same time interval.
It gets a little stale after 5. Just to kind of give you an idea of where we are, to answer some of your questions. So TML every year does a water sewer rate survey, and they ask how much would it cost a residential customer, say, who uses 5,000 gallons of water, what would their bill look like? And for a residential customer who uses 5,000 gallons of water in Belton, we would charge $57.10, just under that $60. So if you look at some of our surrounding cities, Harker Heights is 54, Temple's 53.60, Colleen's down to 49.07. But then you also have cities like Leander way up here at 94.68, just a wide variety. So I would say we're competitive, at least, kind of in general. But each city is kind of unique in their needs. And that's why there's some variety there, even though we may kind of have the same source. So this is kind of a chart here of your water revenue history. Blue is the water component of our revenue. Orange is kind of the sewer component, and the green is the other stuff. So you can see a gradual increase in revenues over time. We've had about a 30% customer count increase in that time frame as well. So that's the revenues. On the expense side, again, I want to look at expenses kind of in a couple of different ways. The first by division. So these are the divisions of the utility fund, water and sewer fund, utility administration, finance, water, sewer collection, et cetera. Our amended budget for 21 is $8,989,000. Again, our estimate is $9,262,000. Our budget for next year is $10,604,000, which is a $1.6 million increase over the amended budget for fiscal year 21. So when you're looking at this, the one that really jumps out at you is that minus $2.3 million there. And you'll probably recall the discussion that we had when we were doing the general fund is we have this division in the water and sewer fund called other costs. And essentially there's only two things there again. That's debt service. And then it was the utility master plan for $400,000. So all I've done for fiscal year 22 is move about $1.6 million worth of debt service payments from the other cost division into that utility finance division. I moved about $400,000 worth of costs for the utility master plan from that other cost division and that to this utility administration division. Simply just moving where it goes. As you can tell, I'm eliminating these other cost divisions that really, it's not really a division of our government. On some of these other things, let's see, water increases $178,000. Much of that is that debt service for WCID that we talked about. This sewer collection and sewer lift stations, $813,000 and $412. Most all of that are capital transfers to capital projects to cash fund some of those capital projects that we have coming up. That's that increase. So significant increase in the expenditure side.
Can you remind me again what utility finance is?
Utility finance is my group, which for the most part does utility billing. It's the utility billing, my customer service reps in front. It's I think you'll have the meter folks in this group. It's that utility billing function primarily is what utility finance is.
And that's going up 1.6.
Yeah, that's all that 1.5 million of that 1.6, actually a little more than that, is all the debt service that we're moving from other costs. See, other costs became zero. I'm taking it out of that division and moving it up to utility finance. Does that make sense? It's just moving it into a different division is what that is. So looking at expenses now kind of on by category, these are the various categories of expenses that we have. 20% of the costs in the water and sewer fund for 22 are personnel costs. But what I want to show you is 27% of the budget in fiscal year 22 are these transfers that you see, $2.8 million. And of that $2.8 million, $1.9 million is going to cash fund projects in fiscal year 22. Okay. We'll talk about that more in a bit. So looking at it here, kind of as a chart, as a table, $8.9 million budgeted, 10.604 next year. You see the changes by category. Personnel costs increase 238,000, services go up 543, et cetera. Here's that transfer increase, 670,000. So what are some of the significant things going on in the water and sewer fund for 22? Well, there's been a lot of promotion, reclassifications of people in the water and sewer fund lately. I have some changes I made to the salary allocation schedule, and then just merit increases and health insurance and all that other stuff causes personnel costs to go up. Again, I'd mentioned the $400,000 to do a utility master plan. That's now in services and consulting expenses, and then we'll do a rate study for about $30,000.
So we're going to pay that. We're going to pay $400,000 in consulting expense next year.
Whether or not that happens all in one fiscal year, I'm not sure. But we'll budget for it. That's to do that very large study that's going to take a lot of time to do. We had that budgeted in the current.
It was deferred last year because of COVID. We just set it on the back burner for the time being, but we budgeted it again for next year and we may go forward with that.
Also, in 21, we expected to, in the current fiscal year, we expected to issue about $2.5 million worth of bonds for the North Belton elevated storage tank. We included $260,000 in the budget in fiscal year 21, what we call anticipated debt service, to have money budgeted to make that first payment if we had to in 21. Well, that elevated storage tank project has now been pushed back a couple of years. So I don't need to budget that in 22. And so that's causing, that causes the budget to go down actually by $260,000.
Just a question about that, pushing it back. It always concerns me when I hear all the new housing starts and the expansion of the jail and everything else that's going on, which is all great. I'm not complaining whatsoever, but pushing back that water tower just sometimes makes me a little nervous.
You need to say anything about that?
We are preparing the bids right now, or the packet to go out for bids on the water tower. Hopefully, I'll start advertising it in about a month prior to my departure.
We'll come back and
You
give
can't
you.
leave until you get it figured out. Is that what we were hearing?
We'll come back and give you a complete report on that.
That's exactly what she said.
All right.
So
Thank
you're
you.
you're saying estimated cost would be $2.5 million by that number?
Potentially, yeah, up to $3 million.
And we budgeted 600,000 for a debt payment. So if my math is correct, we could get the tickle and pull 1.9 million out of fund balance and 600,000 out of,
Or at least
what we already
or at least
budgeted.
finance it on a very short
and
term.
it's paid for, and we still have 1.1 million in fund balance over the excess. Is that my assumption is correct?
Yeah,
Yes, next meeting, we're going to talk about capital projects. This is more operations than.
Sorry, I didn't mean to get
Yes.
ahead of your story, but
Yeah.
I keep thinking about that when I see all these housetops popping up.
Yeah, somebody who lives practically under the water tower. I mean, I think it'd be nice.
Yeah.
Water purchases goes up by 257,000 again. We budgeted only $120,000 for that WCID debt. We're going to spend about 330,000. So I needed to increase that.
Do you have a slide with the acre feet of what's being contracted that we have access to? And if you don't, if you could prepare that for a future meeting. 'Cause
I can.
I think water rights is very significant, and we need to stay on top of that.
Yes, sir. First page of your water and sewer budget for fiscal year 21.
Got it.
Other things that are happening in the water sewer fund, they're going to do about $159,000 worth of work on buildings as part of the after action report from the winter storm, weatherizing some facilities at Public Works. And also we need a new work order system for Public Works, and that's about $75,000 that's in capital. But here's your big number. So again, I mentioned $1.9 million we're going to transfer from the utility fund into capital project funds to do these projects that you see here. There's going to be about $100,000 for the East 20.5 Avenue water line replacement. We're going to spend another $100,000 on a pump and motor for the Loop 121 pump station. The two generator projects you see here, and actually that's more than just two generators, about $700,000 for those emergency generators for these vital infrastructures. And then we're going to spend about $1 million on McFarland Estates water and sewer improvements for the subdivision around this building. Significant capital contribution you'll see there. Wanted to show you this, the outstanding debt in the water and sewer fund at October 1st will be about $16,504,000, made up of those issuances there. And the debt payments for the next several years are going to be right around this $1.6 million number. They'll drop off to just over 1.2 million in 2030 and then fall even more in 2036. The blue that you see are the principal component of that payment, and the green is the interest component of those payments.
Well, I either going colorblind or we have totally different colors depending on which screen you look at.
That does look blue on that screen, doesn't it? It's green
So
here.
how much are any of these callable? I mean, any of this debt that, because it just shows the series, it doesn't
Yes.
show when
The
be refunded.
the first available call date will be in 2024. 2024. And I believe that is probably for this 2016 that you see there. Could be for the 2015, but our first call opportunity is 2024.
Okay.
So that's the water and sewer fund. Now let's move on to drainage. So the budget for drainage is kind of, we expect to end the year increasing reserves by about $70,000. Kind of moving right along with the budget, especially revenues are right in line. Expenditures, we had some personnel savings, insurance and things like that, and some savings in our general engineering. So we should begin fiscal year 22 with about $304,000 in reserves. The fiscal year 22 revenues are $580,400, expenditures $558,000, with a slight increase in fund balance. Not too much excitement going on here on the revenue side. Drainage fees increase about $34,000. Again, we're not proposing any changes to the fee itself, but about 6% would be the growth rate. Again, not primarily, it's essentially driven by customer count. More people we have in, you're adding to that. And interest income is still really low. So how does our drainage fee look compared to other cities? Well, for residents, we charge a flat $5 fee. And you can see that we're kind of lower than the surrounding areas a bit. On the non-residential side, it's based upon impervious impervious cover. I'll get it right in a second. And if there's 100,000 square feet of impervious surface cover, we would charge $100 for that.
Cheap.
I'm sorry?
That's a deal.
Yeah.
I think.
Yes.
For businesses. I think the citizens are pulling the load in that situation. And just one other little request is John Holmes' special request, but can we pick 5 other similar cities and use those same cities in comparison for water, drainage, unless they just don't have something? We kind of, we had Leander in one and another city in another, but
The same 5.
5, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just so we can
Yeah.
apples to apples throughout.
No, that's good.
Surrounding cities are certainly some we want to compare to.
Yeah. That's the leakage.
Yeah, that's good. So on the TML side, I picked kind of who I picked surrounding, and they have to have actually submitted something to TML.
Sure.
But I'll do some searching, and yeah, that's a great idea. We'll do that.
So I don't know, when, I've got a comment on the expense side, but you may be done. Are we-
This is drainage. Yes.
Drainage.
We'll get to drainage. A couple more slides, I promise.
Okay.
Revenues graphically, you can see this increase here over time since 2015. Here's your expenses. So your budget for fiscal year 21 is 531,260. I'm kind of expecting to end at 476,935. And currently the preliminary budget increases the expenditures by only about $27,000 to 558,180. Now's a good time.
Yeah, so we get upset with our neighbors for not mowing their yard or for leaving trash out too long and all that stuff. But anybody who walks up and down Nolan Creek Hike and Bike Trail sees the city's trash that's part of drainage sit there 6 months out of the year, and then we'll clean it up. And so there's lots of debris, trash, mainly things that collect under the bridges, which is part of the purview of drainage. And I think we should put the money to work to do that on a regular basis. I'm not saying every time it rains, but on a regular basis, because that stuff, and what happens is when you do that kind of blockage, when you have another rain event, which we cannot predict, it puts more load on those bridges, which will then create more issues potentially into the structure of those bridges. And so anyway, I would just really strongly suggest that we do better in collecting or removing that. And if it means special equipment that we can pull it off and have log splitters or whatever, and we've spent 10, 20, 100, 30, 300,000 to do that and another extra person, it's not a ton of work, but it's specialized work. And we will deal with that until the cows come home. And so we might as well have some equipment to be able to deal with that. Anyway, that's
in a
just
very
one
similar,
Appearance and flow.
in a very similar way or comparison to the rights of way that TxDOT maintains along the interstate, for example. TxDOT is responsible for the area along Nolan Creek. But in a
not
similar way,
under certain bridges, right? Only some of the bridges, 2 of the bridges, right? So they get 93 or second, and they get Main Street,
Main. Mhm.
but all the others are off.
Right. So you're just saying an allocation of funding to have a more consistent cleanup, basically.
And if we need to remove their, I mean, we have people that volunteer to pick up Texas, they'll put like whatever 4-H club is going to pick up the trash over this next mile. And if the city of Belton needs to do that, and we send them a little
Trash, you're talking about trash along the trail, you're talking about
it's
bridge debris coming
bridge
down,
debris,
coming down
which
the creek
includes
from
trees,
from
branches, styrofoam cups from Cefco, all the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's just there every day. Anyway, we would probably, and again, this is not an operational, this is a budget, but I
Sure,
do know
no,
we're
it's
collecting
time. It's a
money
good time to
for
do it.
these types of things.
Sure.
And we should probably, and this is one area I think we just need to operational step.
We'll do some research, gather some costs and work it in if we can. This slide, significant changes, and there's not many here in drainage. We do need to replace some flood warning sensors along Nolan Creek. 10,400 will get you the first of 3 sensors at Patty Hamilton. And then we are planning to buy a 0-turn mower for about $8,000 out of this division. Debt service for drainage looks like this. It all matures in 2028. Again, around $25,000 a year, depending upon your eyesight. It's either blue or green. You can see how that works. So now let's move along to the TERS fund. We expect to end this fiscal year with $653,000 of reserves in the TERS. Revenues are $2.8 million, expenditures 2.2. So we would increase fund balance in this fund by $657,000. Okay, so what I need to show you here is on the revenue side, our budget is $2,689,000. We're actually going to end this year significantly under budget at $2.3 million. So this is another one. How did I miss this? Well, I can tell you that. The numbers that you see here in the 21 budget were when we were having the discussions with the board, or when the board adopted its budget for 21, we were looking at a 65-cent tax rate at that time, and also values of around 250 million in the TERS. Well, then as everybody went further along the discussion, the tax rate here we ended up with a 63-cent tax rate. And I think the value came in at 242 million instead of 250. So essentially we just received less revenue than we did budgeted. We did not go back to the TERS board to amend their budget based upon these numbers here that after tax rates were adopted and stuff like that. We just come in short. So for 22, I have $2,867,000 budgeted in revenue. And that's based upon a 15% increase in the TERS value, which we've kind of seen, recently. So it would be $278 million of value in the TERS at a 63-cent tax rate will get you to this number here. Again, I'm leaving the county tax rate the same as well. We'll see where we end up adopting. So $178,000 increase in revenue from one budget year to the next. This little graphic right here shows you when we established the TERS way back when, a study was done that kind of projected revenues forward, and it looked like that you see on the bottom. What we've actually done is something like that, as you see in the upper one. We're really skyrocketed lately as we've had more and more development within the TERS, and that's exactly what we want to have happen.
And the TERS has been expanded.
And the TERS was expanded. Well, the TERS expansions, a lot of that was public property, Heritage Park and stuff like that. No tax value there. But yes, this is certainly tremendous growth.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's the big one.
On the operating expenditure side, our budget, $1,943,000, and we kind of expect to come in fairly close to that. And our budget next year, $266,000 more to $2,210,000. 35,000 is included in the budget for 22 as we do a hiring consultants to do an expansion of the TERS, an analysis of what do we do with this TERS at 2024 when it expires. So that work's currently underway, and we need to budget more in 22 to kind of finish that work. Grants increases by $40,000 to fund facade grants. And this $202,000 change in transfers will pay for capital projects. On our facade grants, so in 21, we awarded $30,000 to those guys. In 22, what we know about is $20,000 for Joe Maple and $20,000 for Woodhouse Day Spa. We also kind of have 3 other, what we're calling potential projects out there. $20,000 for Dusty Miller, $20,000 for Bobby Spradley, and $10,000 for Main Street Bridal. What the TERS board has decided to do is go ahead and include all of those that might happen in its budget for fiscal year 22. Debt for the TERS, it's $635,000 worth of TERS debt at October 1st. In addition to its operating fund, TERS has a capital project fund. And then at the end of 21, we may have about $2 million left there. These are the big projects that are being funded with TERS currently. The biggest one of those is Heritage Park. $3.5 million has been funded through the TERS for Heritage Park. In 22, the TERS will put another $1,450,000 towards that project, bringing total funding by the TERS up to $5 million for Heritage Park. Significant contribution there. Southwest Parkway is another big project. The shared use path, Standpipe Park, library. Connell Street has a lot of future allocations out here in 23 and 24. $1.2 million contribution for Connell, 2.4 million in 24. We're talking about, maybe looking for some grants opportunities for that street as well. So there's some major projects that are going on in the TERS. So to kind of give you a thumbs out, look at the view through 2024. This is our budget for 22, kind of growing revenues, kind of in that 15% number for the next 2 years. Expenditures, the big part of expenditures are the transfer to capital projects based upon that schedule I just showed you. The big number is down here at the bottom right. When all is said and done in 2024, the TERS may still have $3.3 million left in 2024 by the time it funds these things. So there's opportunities for other projects there. The last fund that we're going to look at is the EDC. EDC's budgeted revenue was $1,702,000. And here's another one. Wow, my finance guys just really mucking it up a bit here. Coming in at 2.3 million. Well, the reason that is, another explanation. Again, pre-COVID or during COVID, and you'll remember even on the city side, we budgeted very conservatively on the sales tax revenue that we expected, not knowing the impact of COVID. Well, the city amended its budget by $250,000 with budget amendment number 1 that we've done for fiscal year 21. The EDC board has decided just to leave it like it is for now. And so that's the reason there's such just a vast difference between budgeted and actual revenues. Expenditures are slightly lower as well. So again, sales tax revenue I told you about. Also kind of because of COVID and the ability to get around, do things, there's been some expenditure savings, marketing, training, special services, et cetera. That kind of stuff is causing them to go under budget. So the way this ends up then, we could end fiscal year 21 in EDC with just over $4.5 million of spendable fund balance. For 22, $2.4 million of sales tax revenue, essentially is what that is. $2.4 million of revenue is budgeted. The expenditure budget for 22 is $685,000. So we could see an increase of reserves of $1,770,000, which would take them at the end of 22 to $6.3 million of spendable fund balance in EDC. Again, sales tax revenue, comparing 22 budget to 21 budget, it's a huge increase. The better comparison is the budget to that estimate. Just like the general fund, I'm increasing sales tax revenue by 6% is what's causing this $200,000 increase there. On the operating side, the budget increases $138,000 to $685,000. One of the bigger differences there is this $150,000 transfer, which will fund a capital project, which is that one right there. A new project that the EDC is entertaining is an extension of Capitol Way. This $150,000 will do a preliminary design of what that might look like. And so we're setting that aside in a capital project fund to do that in 22. these other big projects that are going on, you know, about I-35 and I-14. Amazing contribution that they're doing there. In addition to its capital project funds, it also has an incentive fund. There's about $1,875,000 in that fund. And that fund, that money is being set aside for future incentives for CGI and Beltec that may or may not come due in the future. But that money's available in the event that it does. So finally, utility revenues are growing as more and more people come here and utilize city services. We don't plan any rate increases for water, sewer, or drainage. And then they're certainly putting aside, both utilities are putting aside a lot of money for capital projects. And let's not forget that TERS and EDC have been really great partners in doing some of these capital projects on behalf of the city.
Amen. And also the BEDC is funding the downtown economic plan, which I think $70,000 is how much BEDC is scheduled for that. And I think that'll be very, very valuable to the city. So again, their partnership is invaluable.
Agreed. So kind of some upcoming dates for you. The next council meeting, July 13, first meeting in July, I'm going to come to you with the 22 to 26 capital improvements program. That's when we're going to talk about that's surplus fund balance, if you will, and some things that we can do with that. On the 27th is when we'll present a proposed budget to council. We'll get a tax roll right around the 23rd of July. And I won't have time by that to work that into the proposed budget. It just will come too late for that. But when I give you the proposed annual budget for fiscal year 22 on the 27th, I will also give you some changes from these discussions that we've had this meeting and the last meeting. Some of those things that we've incorporated or modified into the proposed budget. So you'll have that as well. Also at that meeting, we're going to propose a public hearing and we'll talk about various fees. Proposing a tax rate will probably occur on August the 10th. Holding special public hearings on the 7th, adopting the strategic plan, annual budget, and the tax rate on September the 14th. Any questions or comments other than what we've said?
If someone had told me 14 or 15 months ago that we would have increased revenues going into COVID, I would have never believed you. So we've been very blessed to get through it as well as we have.
Thank you. Sure. Anything else? Okay.
Any other comments or questions for Mike? If not, that concludes our regular meeting. And we will reconvene in just a few moments in executive session. Thank all of y'all for coming. Mary, you're legal, but don't burn your house down. Just approve it, okay?